I came home after 2 weeks of sleeping in a hospital chair beside my mother's bed. My key didn't work anymore. I called my husband. "Why did you change the locks?" He said calmly, "This house belongs to my daughter now. You don't have a place here anymore." I hung up without another word and texted my lawyer. They took the bait. Proceed immediately. The afternoon I came home from the hospital felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow. For 2 weeks I had lived inside the low hum of machines and the steady shuffle of nurses' shoes on linoleum floors. My mother had gone in for what was supposed to be a routine surgery, and then everything got complicated. Infection. Another procedure. Nights where I sat beside her hospital bed holding a paper cup of bad coffee watching the numbers on the monitor rise and fall. By the time she stabilized, I hadn't slept properly in days. So when I finally drove home that afternoon, all I wanted was a shower, clean sheets, and a long silence. Our house sat on a quiet street outside Columbus, Ohio. 2-story brick white shutters, maple tree out front that dropped leaves all over the driveway every fall. I'd helped pick it out 4 years earlier after David and I got married. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. Something felt off. It took me a second to notice the first detail. The porch light was different. We'd had a black lantern-style fixture for years. Now there was a new brushed steel light mounted beside the door. I frowned, grabbed my overnight bag from the passenger seat, and walked up the front steps. Maybe David had decided to do a little home improvement while I was gone. He liked to start projects without warning. I slipped my key into the lock. It didn't turn. At first I thought I was just tired. I pulled the key out, turned it around, tried again. Still nothing. I stared at the handle. Then I noticed the scratch marks around the deadbolt, fresh ones. The lock had been changed. I stood there for a few seconds holding my key in the air like it might suddenly start working if I waited long enough. It didn't. A strange calm settled over me. Not shock, not panic. Just quiet understanding. I took my phone out of my coat pocket and dialed David. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said casually. No concern, no question about how my mother was doing. Just hey. "David," I said, "why did you change the locks?" There was a pause. Not the confused kind. The kind where someone is deciding how blunt they're willing to be. Then he said flat and simple, "This house belongs to my daughter now." For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry." "You heard me," he said. "Emily's name is on the property now." Emily. His daughter from his first marriage, 27, perpetually between jobs, always convinced life had somehow shortchanged her. "She needs stability," he continued. "And honestly, Laura, this arrangement just makes more sense." I looked at the front door of the house I'd spent 4 years paying for decorating, repairing. The house whose kitchen renovation I'd funded after David said his savings were tight. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" I asked. His answer came quickly. "You should probably find somewhere else to stay." No hesitation. No apology. Just a decision already made. I could picture him saying it too, sitting at the kitchen island with that same calm expression he used when explaining why a restaurant bill should be split evenly. Like he was discussing logistics. Not a marriage. "David," I said quietly, "I just spent 2 weeks sleeping in a hospital chair because my mother almost died." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry about that, but this situation isn't about your mother." Of course it wasn't. It was about opportunity. And they thought they'd found the perfect one. I stood on the porch a moment longer, listening to the faint rustle of wind through the maple tree. Then I said, "Okay." He sounded almost relieved. "Okay. Okay." And before he could say another word, I ended the call. I didn't knock. I didn't try the back door. I didn't yell. Instead, I opened my messages and typed a single text. To Daniel Ross. My attorney. They took the bait. Proceed immediately. I hit send. Within 30 seconds, my phone rang. Daniel's voice came through calm and steady. Did they actually change the locks? Yes. And he confirmed the transfer. Word for word. A small exhale. Good, he said. Good. Not sympathetic, not surprised. Just good. Then they've made this much easier. I looked at the house again. Inside those walls were my furniture, my clothes, my dishes, my documents, my life. And David thought a new deadbolt erased all of that. They seem very confident, I said. Daniel chuckled softly. They usually are. Until when? Until the paperwork catches up with them. I leaned against the porch railing. So what happens now? Well, he said, first we file the injunction. And then Daniel replied calmly, we show them exactly who owns that house. I glanced at the new lock on the door one more time. For the first time since I arrived, I smiled. Good, I said quietly. Let them enjoy it tonight. Daniel had warned me months earlier that something was wrong. At the time, I didn't want to believe him. David and I had been married 4 years. We weren't a fairy tale couple, but we were stable, predictable, the kind of marriage that ran on routines instead of romance. We split groceries. We watched baseball on Sundays. We argued about thermostat settings. Normal things. Or at least that's what I told myself. The first crack appeared the previous winter. It was a small thing, the kind of detail most people would overlook. A document on the kitchen counter. David had left it half hidden beneath a stack of mail. A title company header sat at the top of the page. At first I assumed it was refinancing paperwork. Then I saw Emily's name. Not mine. Not ours. Just Emily Carter. My stomach tightened. I didn't confront him that night. I simply took a photo of the document with my phone and placed it back where it had been. Later, when David came home, he acted exactly the same as always. He kissed my cheek, asked what I wanted for dinner, turned on ESPN. Like nothing had changed. But something had. A week later, I called Daniel Ross. I had known Daniel for almost 10 years. He'd handled the paperwork when I sold my old condo after my first divorce. He was careful, patient, the kind of attorney who never rushed to conclusions. After I sent him the photo, he called me back the next morning. Laura, he said, have you signed anything regarding a property transfer? Number. Have you authorized anyone to act on your behalf? Number. He was quiet for a moment. Then we need to look at this closely. That was the beginning. Over the next 2 months, I started noticing things I had previously ignored. David began talking about Emily more often. Not in the usual parental way. In a strategic way. She just needs a little stability, he'd say over dinner. Or, it's hard for young people to get started these days. Emily, meanwhile, began visiting the house more frequently. She would walk through the kitchen, slowly running her fingers across the countertops we had installed 2 years earlier. These cabinets are really nice, she said once. I smiled politely. They should be. I paid for them. She laughed like it was a joke. But she didn't respond. Another evening, she stood in the living room studying the windows. You know, she said casually, if you replaced these curtains with lighter ones, the whole space would open up. I set my wine glass down. Are you redecorating my house? David quickly stepped in. She's just making conversation. But Emily didn't look embarrassed. She looked thoughtful. Like she was already imagining changes. That night after she left, I asked David directly. Why was there a title document with Emily's name on it? He didn't hesitate. Oh, that's nothing, just something the bank suggested. What kind of suggestion? Planning for the future. The answer was vague. Too vague. I let the conversation end there. But inside, something cold settled into place. Over the following weeks, Daniel helped me quietly gather information. The mortgage. The original purchase agreement. The renovation receipts. Every payment I had made toward the house. The numbers told a very clear story. Nearly 70% of the money that went into the house came from me. My savings. My salary. My retirement withdrawal when we replaced the roof. Even the down payment had come from the sale of my old condo. Legally speaking, things were far more complicated than David seemed to believe. But Daniel wasn't interested in rushing. Right now, he told me during one meeting they're only testing the idea. What do you mean? People like this, he said, usually start small, conversations, suggestions, hypothetical plans. And then they wait for the right moment. What moment? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked directly at me. A moment when you're distracted. A moment when you're vulnerable. A moment when they think you won't fight back. That moment arrived sooner than any of us expected. 3 weeks later, my mother was rushed to the hospital with complications from her surgery. Everything else disappeared overnight. The house. The documents. The suspicion. For 2 straight weeks, I lived in a hospital chair beside her bed. I barely went home. I barely slept. And apparently that was exactly the opportunity David and Emily had been waiting for. When Daniel heard I was staying at the hospital full-time, he called me late one evening. "Laura," he said carefully, "if they're going to make a move, this is when it will happen." "What should I do?" "Nothing. Nothing. Let them believe you're too busy to notice." I looked across the dim hospital room at my mother sleeping beneath a blanket of wires and tubes. "You want me to just wait?" "Yes." "For what?" "For them," Daniel said calmly, "to show us exactly what they're willing to do." And now I knew. Changing the locks. Claiming the house. Erasing me from the door. They hadn't just made a move. They had stepped directly into the trap. I didn't try to stay at the house that night. Instead, I drove back to the same small hotel near the hospital where I'd been sleeping for the past 2 weeks. The night clerk barely looked up when I checked in again. By that point, I was just another tired family member passing through carrying a bag, and the kind of exhaustion hospitals create. But this time I wasn't only tired. I was waiting. Daniel called me the next morning at 8:12 a.m. "Did they stay in the house last night?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." I could hear him flipping through papers on his desk. "Laura, I want you to listen carefully. What they did yesterday, changing the locks and declaring ownership, is exactly the kind of behavior courts take very seriously. Because of the property transfer. Partly," he said, "but more importantly because they attempted to remove a legal resident and co-owner from the property without due process. In plain terms, they had acted like the house already belonged to them. And that assumption was their biggest mistake." Daniel continued explaining the next steps. First, he had already filed a temporary injunction with the county court that morning. That filing did 2 things immediately. It froze any property transfers connected to the house, and it prevented anyone from removing or selling assets inside the home. Second, he had contacted the title company involved in the suspicious document I had photographed months earlier. "Turns out," Daniel said calmly, "the paperwork your husband started was never fully completed." I leaned back in the hotel chair. "What does that mean?" "It means the property was never legally transferred." "So Emily doesn't own anything." "Correct." "And David knows that..." That, Daniel said, is the interesting part. Because according to the title company, David had attempted to begin a transfer process months earlier, but it required signatures that never happened. Mine. Without my authorization, the transaction was incomplete. Which meant the house was still exactly what it had always been. A jointly owned marital property. Legally speaking, David had just locked a co-owner out of her own home and documented it in a phone call. I remembered the exact words he used. "You don't have a place here anymore." Daniel asked one final question. "Did he say Emily owns the house now?" "Yes." "Perfect." That single sentence turned a family argument into a legal statement. And Daniel planned to use it. Over the next 48 hours, things moved faster than I expected. A process server arrived at the house late that afternoon. According to Daniel, the documents were handed directly to David. The filing demanded immediate access to the property and scheduled a hearing to review the attempted transfer. But that wasn't the part that surprised me. What surprised me was Emily. That evening around 6 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Instagram. Emily had posted a photo. I opened it slowly. It showed her standing in the living room of the house holding a glass of champagne. The same living room I had painted 2 summers earlier. The caption read, "New beginnings, finally home." I stared at the picture for a long moment. Then I took a screenshot and sent it to Daniel. His reply came almost instantly. "Excellent. Not angry. Not shocked. Just satisfied." An hour later he called. "That photo helps us more than you realize," he said. "How?" "Because it shows they believed they had control of the property. And that matters. It shows intent. Intent to claim something that legally wasn't theirs. And courts, Daniel explained, cared very much about intent. The next morning, something even more interesting happened. David called me. I let it ring twice before answering. "Laura," he said, sounding tense. "Did you file something with the court?" I kept my voice calm. "What makes you ask?" "We just got served with some paperwork." "I see. You didn't mention anything about lawyers yesterday." "No," I said quietly. "You didn't ask." Silence filled the line. I could hear him breathing. "This doesn't need to become a legal issue," he finally said. That sentence almost made me laugh. He had changed the locks on my home, declared the house belonged to someone else, and now he wanted to avoid legal issues. "What exactly did you think would happen?" I asked. Another long pause. Then he said carefully, "Emily and I thought you would understand." Understand. That word hung in the air between us. Understand what I asked. That it's better for everyone if she has the house. I looked out the hotel window at the quiet parking lot below. "You mean better for you?" "No," he said quickly, "better for the family." "The family?" That old justification again. "You know something, David," I said calmly. "What?" "You're right." There was a flicker of relief in his voice. "I'm glad you see that." "Oh, I do." Because in that moment I finally understood something clearly. He didn't think he had stolen anything. He thought he had simply rearranged things in a way that benefited him, which meant he didn't feel guilty. He felt justified. And people who feel justified tend to keep talking. "Laura," he continued, "if we can just settle this quietly." "You're right," I said again. "We should settle it." Another hopeful pause. "Good," he said. "How?" I smiled slightly. "We'll let the court decide." Then I ended the call. A few minutes later, Daniel texted me. "Hearing scheduled for Monday." 4 days away? I set my phone down. For the first time since the lock refused to turn in the door, I felt completely calm. David thought he had taken my home. But what he had really done was provide the evidence. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. The county courthouse in Franklin County sits on a wide street lined with old government buildings and tired coffee shops. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, the wind cutting straight through my coat. I had been inside courthouses before, but never like this. Not as the person whose marriage had just collapsed in public documents. Daniel met me near the entrance. He carried a thin leather folder under his arm and looked exactly the way he always did, calm, composed, almost relaxed. "You ready?" he asked. "As ready as anyone can be," I said. Inside the building, everything smelled faintly of paper and cleaning solution. Fluorescent lights hummed above rows of benches. A few other people waited quietly along the hallway outside courtroom B. And then I saw them. David stood near the far wall with Emily beside him. Emily looked different without the confidence of that Instagram photo. Her arms were folded tightly, and she kept glancing at the courtroom door like she expected someone to escort her out at any moment. David, however, tried to look composed. When his eyes met mine, he forced a small smile. "Laura," he said. I stopped a few feet away. "David." Emily didn't speak. She just stared at me. Daniel stepped slightly forward. "Mr. Carter," he said politely. David nodded stiffly. "This really didn't need to go this far," he said, glancing between us. Daniel didn't answer. Because the courtroom door opened at that moment. A clerk called our case and we all stepped inside. The hearing itself didn't take long. That was the surprising part. There was no dramatic shouting, no emotional speeches. Just facts. Daniel presented the timeline clearly. The house purchase. The financial contributions. The attempted property transfer. And finally the lock change. Then he played a recording. David's voice filled the quiet courtroom. "This house belongs to my daughter now. You don't have a place here anymore." The words sounded colder when spoken back to him. David shifted in his chair. His attorney tried to argue that the situation had been misunderstood, that David believed the transfer process had already been completed. But the judge asked one simple question. "Did you legally evict your spouse before changing the locks?" David's lawyer hesitated. "No, Your Honor." "Did you have sole ownership of the property at the time?" Another pause. "Number." The judge nodded once. That was enough. The ruling was straightforward. The attempted property transfer had no legal standing. The house remained marital property. And most importantly, I was to be granted immediate access back into the home. Emily's face drained of color. "But I live there now," she said suddenly. The judge looked at her calmly. "You moved into a residence that was under active ownership dispute. But this court does not recognize your claim to the property." Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. David's shoulders sagged. In less than 20 minutes, the entire illusion they had built collapsed. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt strangely quiet. Emily stormed past us without saying a word. David stayed behind. He looked older than he had just a week earlier. "Laura," he said quietly. Daniel stepped aside, giving us a little space. "I didn't think it would turn into this," David said. "No," I replied, "you didn't. I thought we could handle it as a family." I studied his face. For the first time since this started, he looked genuinely uncertain. "David," I said gently, "you changed the locks on my home while I was sitting beside my mother in a hospital." He didn't respond. "I needed you that week," I continued. "Instead, you were planning how to erase me from the house." His eyes dropped to the floor. "I thought Emily deserved a chance." "She deserves a chance to build her own life," I said, "not take someone else's." He ran a hand through his hair. "What happens now?" That question hung between us. The answer could have been many things. Anger. Punishment. Years of courtroom battles. But none of that was what I wanted anymore. "I'm filing for divorce," I said calmly. David closed his eyes briefly. "I figured." "The house will be sold," I continued. "We'll divide the equity legally." He nodded slowly. "And Emily?" I thought about her standing in my living room with that champagne glass. Then I shrugged. "That's up to you." For the first time, David looked like a man who understood the consequences of his own decisions. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he just realized how badly things had gone. Either way, the moment had already passed. "I know," I said. Then I turned and walked down the hallway with Daniel beside me. Behind us, David remained standing in the quiet corridor. And for the first time since he changed the locks, he no longer had the door. 3 weeks after the hearing, the house went on the market. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. That decision surprised a lot of people. Daniel asked me twice if I was sure. "You fought pretty hard to get access back," he said one afternoon as we reviewed the final divorce documents in his office. "I didn't fight for the house," I replied. "I fought for the truth." There's a difference. By then I had already been back inside the house several times. The first time felt strange, not painful, just distant. The furniture was still there. The kitchen still smelled faintly like the lemon cleaner I always used on Sundays. My plants by the window had dried slightly from neglect. But the place no longer felt like a home. It felt like a finished chapter. David had moved into a small apartment across town. I heard that Emily stayed with him for a while, though I didn't ask for details. Their lives were no longer my responsibility. The divorce itself was surprisingly quiet. No dramatic battles. No drawn-out accusations. The numbers were simple. After selling the house, the equity would be divided according to the financial contributions Daniel had already documented. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was fair. And fairness was enough. On the morning the house officially sold, I returned one last time to collect the final box of things from the garage. The new owners were a young couple in their early 30s. They stood in the driveway holding hands, smiling nervously the way people do when they're about to move into their first real home. They didn't know the history of the place. And that was a good thing. The woman looked at me kindly. "Thank you for taking such good care of it," she said. I nodded. "I hope it treats you well." Inside the garage, I picked up the last box. A few photo albums. Some winter coats. And a small ceramic mug my mother had given me years earlier. When I stepped back outside, the couple had moved toward the front porch, discussing paint colors and garden ideas. Their voices sounded hopeful. Light. I walked over to the edge of the driveway and paused for a moment. For years I had believed that house represented stability. Marriage. Family. But the truth was simpler. A house is just walls and a roof. What gives it meaning is the people inside. And sometimes, the wrong people are standing in the doorway. Later that afternoon, I drove to the hospital again. My mother had finally been moved into a rehabilitation room. She was sitting upright in bed when I entered, reading a magazine with her glasses halfway down her nose. "You look calmer," she said immediately. "I am." She studied my face. "Did everything get resolved?" "Yes," I said. "Your husband." "Ex-husband." She nodded slowly as if that confirmed something she had suspected long ago. "And the house?" she asked. "Sold." Her eyebrows lifted. "Really?" I realized something I said, pulling a chair beside her bed. "What's that?" "That winning doesn't always mean keeping the house. Sometimes winning means walking away with your dignity intact." Sometimes it means refusing to carry someone else's selfish decisions into the rest of your life. And sometimes it means allowing consequences to do the talking for you. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand gently. "I'm proud of you," she said. For a moment we just sat there in the quiet hospital room. The machines hummed softly. Sunlight filtered through the window. Peaceful. Simple. Exactly the kind of life I wanted going forward. Later that evening, after I returned home to the small apartment I had rented temporarily, I received a message from David. Just 2 sentences. "I know I handled everything wrong. I hope someday you can forgive me." I read the message once. Then I placed my phone down. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something you grant in a text message. It was something time decides quietly. But consequences, those happen much faster. And David had already met his. I walked to the window of the apartment and looked out at the quiet street below. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt open. And that door, no one else had the key. A small thought before you go. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't anger. It's calm. It's preparation. It's letting the truth speak louder than the people who tried to silence you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced betrayal, injustice, or a moment where someone thought you wouldn't stand up for yourself, I hope it reminded you of something important. Quiet strength is still strength. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your stories matter more than you might think. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about resilience, justice, and the quiet power of standing your ground, consider subscribing and joining us again. There are many more stories waiting to be told.